Do you have any suggestions for finding a patron deity? How do you organize your Book of Shadows or Grimoire? Who's your favorite deity to work with? How did you learn what your Fylgja was? Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and in this week's video we will have a good old Q&A session. So as always, I asked all of you on Patreon, of course, on Instagram and on YouTube for your questions, witchy and non-witchy, but usually there aren't that many non-witchy questions, so let's get into them. As always, of course, I have all the questions on my phone, and we will start off right away with the Patreon questions because my Patreons have a priority in Q&As. So if you want to make sure that your questions are answered in Q&As, this will be a way. So let's get into them. The first question is a non-witchy question actually. What is your favorite fruit? I mean, the fruits that I'm eating most often are very basic apples and bananas, but I really love kiwis. I love basically any sorts of berries, so probably pears are also great. Anything like that, I guess. Then next up, what do you recommend as far as beginning deity worship? Like, what actions should a person take? First of all, definitely check out my deity worship and deity work videos, because I go over a lot of things in those videos already. I would say the first thing that you should do is research. Everyone will tell you that. Do your research. Do your research on the pantheon that you want to get into. Do your research on the culture that the pantheon stems from, because that is important. Don't remove any deities from their cultural context. Then, of course, depending on if you already know which deity you want to work with, do your research on the specific deity. And then I would say just get into simple worshipping actions, like maybe set up a tiny little space on your altar for them with just a candle and an image or something like that, and just give some offerings. And they don't have to necessarily be huge. It's completely fine if it's like water or incense or something that just works for any deity. Of course, you should have, as I said, already done your research on this deity, so maybe you know some specific things that they really like. Maybe they really like coffee or wine or something, then of course it's always great to use those specific offerings that work perfectly for this one specific deity. And by already like giving offerings and stuff, you will already establish some kind of relationship. It's not a proper working relationship yet, of course, because you're just giving them something and they receive but don't give anything back. At least not because you're asking for it. Maybe they give something back, who knows, but not specifically something you were specifically asking for. But this deity will already know like you were there and you're willing to establish a relationship, you're willing to give them attention and offerings and stuff. So that way it will be much easier to jump into proper working with them. And then yeah, from there, try establishing a working relationship. Try reaching out to them and asking them specifically if they would want to establish a more thorough working relationship with you. And that could be via divination methods. You could also just ask them for a very specific sign. You could meditate and ask them during a meditation or during maybe a spirit flight, something like that, and then go from there. I kind of feel like I should do kind of like a review on my deity worship and work videos, because I actually have no clue what I said in these videos, because it has been 1.5 years, I think, since I've made them. Tell me in the comments if I should review these videos, because I feel like that could be fun. Next Patreon question. What are your plans for your amazing Icelandic vacation? Do you have specific places you want to visit more than others, or gonna wing it? So if you don't follow me on Instagram, you probably don't know it yet, but I will finally go to Iceland this year for 2 weeks. I wanted to go to Iceland for ages, but first I didn't have the money, then COVID happened, then again I didn't have the money, and now I finally was able to book a vacation, and I actually cried when we booked our flights. So I'm incredibly happy that I will finally be able to go to Iceland. We haven't planned that much yet. The thing that we have already planned is where we will stay. We will stay the first week in Akureyri, which is in the north of Iceland, and then the second week we will stay in Reykjavik, which of course is the capital city, and from there we will go wherever we want to go. We have a rental car for the whole 2 weeks, so we're pretty free to do whatever we want. What we basically always do if we go on vacation is that we make a list, or like at least in our heads, a list of things that we want to see, kind of. And then when we're there, we see what we want to do spontaneously the day before. We'll probably look at what we want to do and what's like in the area. I definitely want to go to the sorcery museum. There is a museum especially about Icelandic sorcery, which of course I need to go there. I need to go look at the necropants. I definitely want to go to the National Museum. I feel like that is just something you have to do. But honestly, for me personally, the most important thing is just stop somewhere, wherever we intuitively want to stop, and then explore. That for me personally is the most important thing, to just explore and kind of get to know the country and the energies and the spirits there. That is my most important thing that I want to do in Iceland. But I'm so friggin' excited. Next Patreon question is actually not really a question, it's more of an instruction. Can we meet each of your kitties? Definitely, they're not here right now and I don't want to wake them up. So I will make sure to put some content for you about the kitties now.
Hi. Hi, Scotty. Say hello. Are you so confused? Are you so confused? Hi, Nika. Hi, Bibi. Hi, Juno. Hi, Bibi. Hello. Hello.
You are all so confused. What am I doing with the camera in your faces?
Hi. Everyone wanted to see you because you're so cute, Juno. Hi, baby.
Juno is always annoyed.
Hello. Hi.
And now the last Patreon question. On occasions when you're not connecting indoors or offering, do you give offerings out in nature, or rather do you have a very specific place you visit to connect with the spirits or energies? I really love giving offerings in nature. I personally feel like giving offerings out in nature is even more powerful than at my altar. Unfortunately, I live in a big city, so I usually can't really do that. Whenever I want to do that, I have to go specific places and drive there for quite some time. But I sometimes give smaller offerings like bird food and stuff like that in parks or something, because I know that the birds in big cities are struggling, so make sure to lay out bird food. That is something I really like to do, or like in summer when it's very hot, I just give some water to the land spirits and to the plant spirits around in parks and stuff. But apart from that, I don't really go out and give big offerings, because the only places with nature that are very close to me are a cemetery, and I don't want to leave bigger offerings in a cemetery. And apart from that, I have like a miniature park. It's basically just one little road thingy and like 4 trees and a couple of benches. That's it. So of course there are a lot of people around, so I don't really give offerings there. I'm thinking about starting giving offerings there though at night, maybe, because of course at night there aren't people around there. I hope as soon as I'm not living in the city anymore, I will be able to give proper offerings in nature, because I really love doing that. And that was it with my Patreon questions. Now let's go into some other questions, shall we? Let's see. Do you think mixing pantheons and deity work is a good idea? I think that's not a problem, as long as you can handle doing your proper research on 2 pantheons and 2 cultures. I personally wouldn't want to do that, because that seems like a lot of work, but if you have the time to do that, then sure, go on. Maybe depending on the pantheon, depending on the tradition, it would make sense to keep the altars separate. I guess you just have to check with maybe also the deities that you want to specifically work with, if they're cool to share an altar or to be invoked at the same time for one ritual. So I feel like it's a lot of coordination work that I personally wouldn't want to do, but if you want to do that, go on. There's no law that forbids it. Ooh, that's a good question. If you could do anything you wanted for a day, what would you do, like a dream day? I would definitely go somewhere for breakfast because I'm such a breakfast person, but I would go there pretty late because I love sleeping in, so I would sleep in. Then I would go somewhere for breakfast and read because I love that. Just going to cafes and stuff and just read there and have my breakfast or lunch or whatever. Then I would maybe go to a flea market or go thrifting or something. I would want to definitely go for a walk somewhere in nature. I would love to go to some kind of museum, either like a history museum or like an art museum. I really love doing that. I would probably want to have amazing dinner, like really amazing pizza or something. I would want to have good sex that day, because why not? I feel like that's it. And that's actually something I could do all in one day, so nice. Let's see, what's your most favorite part of your practice? That's such a good question. I feel like maybe my most favorite part of my practice is whenever I feel very connected. I can't properly explain it, but you know what I mean? Like when you're really in this extreme witchy headspace, in this practicing headspace. I love the feeling of being in this headspace. I don't know if that properly answers the question. It's not like one specific spell or like one deity or something. It's just the feeling that I have whenever I practice, and I'm very much feeling it. Oh, which pagan paths or practices fascinate you but you haven't had time to explore yet? Before I got into Scandinavian things, I was very much into Celtic spirituality, the Celtic pantheons, which aren't properly Celtic, but like back then I didn't know. So I assumed they're just Celtic. But yeah, so Irish and Welsh, for example, I was very into that, but didn't really stick. So I still feel like it's interesting, but I wouldn't practice it. So I guess that's the only thing, because I never really got into Greek things or Roman things. Do you use bones in your practice? What is your relationship with them? I actually don't use bones that often in my practice. Unfortunately, I would love to work with bones more, especially because I also work with hell, and I feel like that just works well together. The problem is though that acquiring bones ethically in Germany is very hard, because even if you find something in a forest, legally you're not allowed to take it, and in general you just don't find anything. Especially like in northern Germany, there aren't that many very big forests, so also there aren't that many big forests with a lot of animals, and you don't usually really find bones there, at least I don't. I know that friends of mine who live in the south of Germany definitely have more luck with finding bones, but yeah, as far as I know, you're legally not even allowed to take them. Same with like antlers and stuff like that, because it belongs to the, what's the person called? The forester? The person who keeps the forest, basically. Yeah, that person is legally allowed to keep the bones and everything, to like count the population and keep an eye on everything and stuff. So acquiring bones ethically isn't that easy in Germany. So the only way I acquire bones is basically on flea markets, whenever I find like deer skulls with antlers and stuff. But I don't really work with that, it's more like decor. But actually I found recently an ethically sourced lynx skull, which, amazing. Instantly got it, because that's kind of like a lifetime, like a once in a lifetime experience to get an ethically sourced lynx skull. So I'm extremely happy about receiving that. That will be probably the first bone that I will properly work with in my practice. Oh, this one is a question that's very, very, very fast to answer. Is it okay to be black and be Norse pagan? Yes, and don't let racists tell you otherwise. You can be black and practice Norse paganism. You can be Asian and practice Norse paganism. You can be Middle Eastern and practice Norse paganism. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you look like or where you're from. The only thing that matters is that you properly do your research, you approach it with respect, and yeah, that you don't think that whatever happens in the Marvel universe has anything to do with Norse paganism, because it doesn't. But apart from that, like as long as you take it seriously, you are very welcome, and please don't let other people tell you otherwise. Interesting. What do you say to newer Norse pagans that like Marvel's take on Thor, but know the difference? you can still enjoy Marvel's depiction of Thor. Like you can enjoy the whole Marvel universe and still be a proper Norse pagan as long as you, as this person said, know the difference. As long as you can kind of keep the two separate in your head while you're practicing, I feel like there's nothing wrong with liking Marvel and liking the depiction of Thor in Marvel as long as you keep it separate. Oh, that's a loaded question. Any tips to start a business of your own? Be prepared to do a lot of work. I can't explain to you how much work a business is. And even if you feel like you're done, something else will pop up. Be prepared to do a lot of work, and also be prepared to never be able to shut up about your business, because if you work a normal 9 to 5, you stop working and you don't have to think about it. But if you're self-employed, if you have like a shop or you're on social media or anything like that, you will keep thinking about it all of the time. You will keep thinking about it, you will have new ideas, and even if you feel like you're working only 8 hours a day and after these 8 hours you want to stop, you won't be able to stop. Maybe there are people out there who are able to do that, I can't. And the chances are very high that you won't be able to do that either. So yeah, be prepared to basically think about it 24/7 and to have to do a lot of work. And it will stress you out. But it will also be extremely satisfying. So yeah, don't get discouraged. Ooh, this is such a good question. Which god haven't you worked with but would like to? I've always wanted to establish a relationship to Eir, for example. I mean, I've always wanted to work with Freyr, and now it's slowly progressing, this relationship, so that is good. What plant is your marker of it's springtime? I'm already seeing chickweed and I am happy about it. Snowdrops. Snowdrops are the first flowers that kind of come up here when it's still winter. For example, right now it's end of January, so it's very much still winter, but the snowdrops are slowly peeking their heads out, at least their leaves. So snowdrops and crocuses are the first flowers to grow here, but that's kind of my marker of now springtime is slowly approaching. It's not yet spring, but that's kind of the first thing that happens where I'm like, yes, spring is coming. And I'm waiting for it all winter, every year. And as soon as it's like middle of January, I will start peeking at like the bushes and everywhere where something could grow, and I have a look out for the first snowdrops and crocuses. And whenever I see one, I freak out. How do you know when you're actually communicating with your gods or deities? For me, it's a feeling. For me, the energy shifts and I feel it physically whenever someone's there, kind of. But there are also other markers, like, for example, whenever someone reaches out, I kind of get this very weird dizzy feeling all of a sudden that doesn't make sense. For example, I would sit on the couch, watch TV, and all of a sudden I'm like, woo, I'm feeling dizzy, and I have no clue why. That's usually when someone's reaching out. Yeah, so it's kind of like they're poking me and I'm like, woo. Yeah, but you have to figure that out for yourself. It's different for everyone. That's very difficult to find out, and you kind of have to trust your own intuition, because no one will be able to tell you if you're right or not. So you'll have to do a lot of experiments with that. Oh, what is at the core of your witchy practice? That's a good question. Animism, definitely. Like, animism is the core of my practice. I don't know if you were asking about like beliefs in the core or practices. If it's about practices, good question. Probably trance states and altered states of consciousness, because whenever I do something, I kind of, in some way or another, work with trance states and altered states of consciousness. Even if I just work with my money bowl, for example, I will go into a light trance when I work with it. How did you learn what your Fylgja was? Do you have any tips or book recommendations for someone? The Fylgja is a very complicated entity, because even if you look at books, you will kind of see a different interpretation of what the Fylgja is in each and every book. And there is no one specific book that tells you what a Fylgja is. So you will kind of have to piece it together. Some I can think of from the top of my head right now are, for example, The Viking Way by Neil Price. It includes things about the Fylgja. And then The Road to Hell by Hilda Ellis Davidson. Those two definitely include parts about the Fylgja. Also, The Children of Ash and Elm by Neil Price also has a part on the Fylgja, but it's usually like a tiny little minor part. in a big book. So you'll have to kind of piece it together from different books, and still usually the authors come to different conclusions on what the Fylgja is. You will see the term Fylgja, for example, being used also for spirits that usually would be Disir, and like it's complicated. And there's no like clear cut, this is what a Fylgja is and this is what Disir are. But what I personally have kind of extracted is that a Fylgja is an entity that is kind of connected to you. It's kind of in some way, in some weird way, a part of your soul. And it can present itself as a female spirit. It's always a woman, like whenever they are kind of mentioned in the sagas, it's always a woman. And they can show themselves as an animal. So there are also sources that mentioned, for example, someone even stumbling over their Fylgjas. It was also mentioned that the person from whose point of view it was written saw the Fylgja and knew what kind of animal the Fylgja presented itself as. So yeah, there are people who can see them. That is the first clue that I got. Apart from that, I basically met with it during spirit flight. So that's something that you could do, because that's something that a lot of people do with their Fylgja, is they will ask their Fylgja to kind of accompany them whenever they go on spirit flight. Whenever they kind of do something in a trance and kind of go somewhere else, they will ask their Fylgja for protection. And of course, if it's easy for you to see things, then you will see what your Fylgja looks like. So I have seen both the human representation of my Fylgja and also the animal representation. Yeah, it's not that hard. It's not as hard as you might think. Oh, that question. Who's your favorite deity to work with? I don't have a favorite. Even if I had a favorite, a secret favorite, I wouldn't even want to say that, because I feel like that's kind of disrespectful to all of the other gods and goddesses. They're all powerful and amazing in their own ways. No favorite here. What would your life be like if you didn't discover magic, like jobs or other hobbies you could have picked up? I'm obsessed with your videos. Keep up the amazing work. First up, thank you. I feel like my life would probably be a lot shittier than it is right now, because before I figured out about this whole witchcraft and paganism sphere, I was a miserable person. My mental health was shit. I had no trust in neither myself nor other people. I was very nihilistic, and yeah, my life just kind of sucked. So I don't even want to imagine where I would be without it. All right, I had to take a quick little break because my microphones were running out of battery. But let's continue. Next question. What's your top 3 favorite herbs and your preferred method of using them? Top favorite herb will probably always be mugwort. I feel very, very much connected to mugwort. Yeah, and that is mostly due to the fact that you can use it so well to enhance your psychic abilities. For example, what I'm using it for is always in my psychic abilities, my psychic boost spell oils. So that is where I'm using them. And the oils I always use before I do divination, for example, or before I do spirit flight. And whenever I'm doing heavy trance work or divination, I will always also use mugwort as incense, and that just works so well. But also it can be used for protection, for example. That's just 2 of the amazing uses of mugwort. I love mugwort so much. Angelica root has become a favorite for example, healing purposes. So I haven't tried it yet, but I really want to make healing oil in hopes that it will work, so that I can maybe use it for my migraines, for example, to ease them a little bit. So for healing, it's an amazing healing plant, but also it's very, very protective. Yeah, but I also really love juniper. I just realized they're all very protective, so juniper is also great for getting rid of negative energies and spirits, so kind of also like exorcisms, but also very protective. Love juniper. I also love foxglove and ground ivy. I guess let's just keep it at that. Next up, is it hard to be consistent in your practice? How do you stay motivated to do your daily magical practices? For me personally, I mean, for example, I don't struggle that much with routines in general. Sometimes I do, but mainly whenever I have a very low energy migraine day, or yeah, whenever I feel like I'm in a depressive episode, which I get them, but luckily not that regularly anymore. But whenever I have like either a migraine or I'm in a kind of depressive episode, then in those cases it's very hard for me to keep up my routines, but in those cases I usually just say fuck it and I just leave it, because that's also fine. But apart from that, I actually need my routines a lot, so it's not that hard to keep up with them as long as I'm very realistic with my routines. So if I made up a routine for myself that includes like 35 steps, of course it would be very hard to keep up with it. But since my routines nowadays are pretty low maintenance, it is actually pretty easy to keep up with them. So if you struggle with them, of course, like if you have ADHD or something, then it will be hard keeping up with your routines no matter what. So I can't really give you any advice on that, because I personally don't really struggle with that. But apart from that, just make sure that your routines are realistic and adjusted to your lifestyle. So thank you, cats, for being loud. My cats decided to fight. But yeah, keep your routines realistic. Think of how much time you actually have in a day for your routines. And if you don't have that much time, then just don't put that much stuff into your routines, and it should be much easier to stick with them. Ooh, do you have a favorite element? What are some different ways you incorporate it into your craft? That is hard actually, because I feel very connected to fire. I really love fire, but I'm also pretty terrified of fire. When it comes to spell work, I guess the element that I use most often is fire, because I really love candle spells. I guess a lot of people can relate to that. I also really love water, which makes kind of sense because my moon sign is a water sign, and although my sun and rising signs are both fire signs, the elements that are most incorporated or most represented in my chart are earth and water. So I also really love earth and water. The only element I can't really get behind that much is air. I don't know, I just don't vibe with it that much. Funnily, I guess I'm pretty earth heavy, but I don't really use the element of earth that much in my spells, apart from, of course, everyone works with earth because we're all working with physical representations of things. But apart from that, I think in my spellcraft I use fire most often, simply because I use so many candles. Okay, I got quite some questions like these, so I will quickly address this. How do you find friends that celebrate your practice and that encourage your spiritual growth, coming from someone in a very conservative town? I guess the internet will be your best friend. For example, I found my coven through Meetup. Probably that will be your best friend, because especially if you live in the conservative town, you don't just want to go around and ask people if they know witchy people. So your internet will be your best friend. Meetup has worked for me always. Whenever we put up public meetups with our group, people attend, and it's usually different people every time. I guess maybe have a look at Meetup. Ooh, I'm sure you have done a video on this before, but can you explain exactly how heathenry and Wicca or general witchcraft mix for you? So first of all, I'm not a Wiccan anymore. Like, I have been back in the days when I started out, but I'm not a Wiccan anymore. So the only thing that mixes for me are heathenry and witchcraft. And for me, that mixes in every single way. My witchcraft practice informs my heathenry practice, and my heathenry practice informs my witchcraft. So for example, through heathenry, I got to work with hell. Through working with hell, I got to work with my ancestors, which in turn brought me into the whole researching about Scandinavian folk magic things. So that whole part of my witchcraft practice came from heathenry, but also I just incorporate smaller things that come with the religion into my practice. So for example, two things that have become very important for me are charging spells with my breath, and also waking up spirits with my breath. The inspiration for that came from Odin, who gave us the breath of life. So that's something, for example, that came from heathenry that became very, very important for me. Another thing is working with my voice and chanting and like spoken incantations. For the longest time, I felt so awkward doing that, but when I started working with Odin, I became more interested in general in using my voice for things and writing maybe little tiny bits of poetry as incantations and chants for spells. So for example, that's also what came from heathenry. And I mean, of course, I incorporate the gods and goddesses in my spell work sometimes whenever I feel like it. I don't really do it that often because for some reason I just always feel like I don't want to bother them. Oh, and the other way around, I nearly forgot. The other way around, the most important thing that came from my witchcraft practice when it comes to heathenry was the way that I communicate with the gods and goddesses and with other spirits. I first got into witchcraft, so I first got into divination and stuff, so I already knew the runes a little bit and tarot and working with the pendulum and working with trance states and things like that. So communicating with the gods and goddesses and with other spirits just was much easier because I already knew all of the basics, basically. Next up, how long have you spoken English and are you self-taught or did you learn in school? Your English is very good, by the way. Thank you so much. I learned in school. I started in 4th grade, so I've spoken or learned how to speak English for a long time, and the last 3 years of my school journey were heavily focused on languages, so it was English, Spanish, and French. I have learned it in school for a long time. I'm not self-taught, but actually I didn't really use English that much after school. But when I, for example, met my coven and started with YouTube and stuff, I became much more entrenched in everything English. So I guess that's where most of my skills nowadays come from. Because I feel like if you watch my first videos and then the videos that I'm filming now, my English has improved a lot. So yeah. Do you have any suggestions for finding a patron deity? I'm having trouble choosing, but I have a few in mind. I personally feel like if you are choosing or looking for one, that's already the wrong approach. I mean, I don't know your practice, so probably don't take what I say too much to heart. But what I always feel like a patron deity is a deity that has become so important to you that at some point this deity became your patron deity. And if you're actively looking for a patron deity, that probably won't happen. I feel like a patron deity will make themselves known to you and you don't have to look for them. So maybe just be a little bit more patient until a deity naturally comes into your life. Also, you don't need a patron deity. You don't even have to work with deities in the first place. So yeah, just probably let everything happen a little bit more naturally. How do you organize your Book of Shadows or Grimoire? Because I am never organized and can never stay consistent. Same. That is probably the reason why I have never showed my Grimoire or Book of Shadows or magical journal on videos, because I'm not consistent either. I have probably started 10 grimoires at this point. I always write down like 3-4 pages. I will get very deep into it and then I stop doing it and I don't put any work into it anymore. That doesn't mean that I don't write stuff down. I still write my stuff down, but on like random little pieces of paper, and I will throw them in my grimoire and I'm like, okay, I will write them down beautifully at some point, and this point just never comes. What I'm more consistent with is my witchy journal, where I write my experiences down. So in my grimoire, I just put knowledge and spells that have worked for me well that I decide to put in my grimoire, things like that. So more like theoretical things, and my journal is just more practical things, meditations, divination sessions, spirit flights, experiences, things like that. I am very consistent with that, so I try to write everything down. But my grimoire? Yeah. So if anyone has tips on that, please put them in the comments because I need them too. And yeah, I guess those were all the questions. If I didn't answer your question, I'm sorry, I just can't answer all of them because it's a lot. But I'm doing Q&As regularly, so if I didn't answer your question, that means that either I will make a proper separate video on that soon, or that I just didn't get to it. So maybe just ask the question again for the next Q&A. Of course, as always, patron shout out. Thank you so much to Nat, the Court Jester, Tia, Alantia, Fabienne, Seth, Tammy, Bresky, Jella, JB, Tim, Anna, Keyboard, Alexander, Laura, Amber, Kristen, John, Ivy, Phoenix, Anton, Noemi, Jenny, Brand, Tyler, Els, Maggie, Betty, Misty, Tiffany, Amy, Colette, Soren, Braden, Tel, Timothy, Coffee, the Honorary Gossip Squirrel, Bjorn, Ash, and Lucy. Thank you so much. As always, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up. Of course, check out all my other socials for my other shenanigans, and check out my online shop. And maybe if you want to support my channel, then make sure to check out my Patreon. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!